US President Joe Biden has praised lawmakers in the House of Representatives after they voted in favour of advancing his multi-trillion-dollar domestic agenda. The vote is the first step towards drafting Biden's $3.5 trillion plan to expand social programs in the country. Lawmakers also agreed to vote on a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, which has already been passed by the Senate. Earlier this month, Biden signed an executive order with a goal of making 50% of new vehicles sold by 2030 zero-emission. But the widespread adoption of electric vehicles will require an accessible nationwide network of charging stations. Kyoko Gasha has more.
Electric vehicles may be the cars of the future. But for New York City owners of these green automobiles, keeping them running is a challenge.
First, there was only one fast charging here in Brooklyn, and I have to travel about 30 minutes.
It's very hard. Yeah, you can't find a lot of places how to charge. Even in municipal garage, there is 5-6 chargers. They are out of order. They are not working.
We haven't found any until this opened here. And this is more like, it's a little bit slower, so it's more like an hour to charge, it seems. But it's not overnight or not all day at the office.
About 14,000 electric vehicles, or EVs, are registered in the Big Apple. But the city has only about 1,200 plugs to power them. Many are in private parking garages. Transportation company Revel opened this depot in Brooklyn in June. There are 25 fast chargers for EVs of any brand. In 20 minutes, car owners can power up for drives of 160 kilometers. It costs $15 to $20. That's cheaper than a tank of petrol.
Our major goal and focus as a company is to lead cities into a zero-carbon future. In order to do that, we truly believe that requires a massive build-out of EV charging infrastructure. So we've started with this one site, the largest universal fast charging station in the US, with many more to come.
President Joe Biden is making a major push to electrify the country's auto industry. He wants to increase the number of charging stations to 500,000, up from the 105,000 that operate today. But an infrastructure bill recently passed by the U.S. Senate would allocate only $7.5 billion to develop a nationwide charging network, less than half the amount the president had called for.
It really comes down to, if you don't have charging stations go up by about 5x over the next, call it 8 to 9 years, it's going to be very difficult to get EVs as a percent of overall automotive anywhere near 10%.
Electric cars currently account for about 2% of the new car market in the U.S., according to Pew Research. Caleb McLennan bought this all-electric Volkswagen SUV in April, around the time of his son's birth.
We kind of bought the car hoping and assuming that the charging infrastructure will come.
If that's the case, by the time his son's an adult, powering up may be as easy as filling up with petrol, paving the way for a greener, cleaner future. Kyoko Gasha, TLT World, New York.
Joann Weiner is an Associate Professor of Economics and the Director of the Applied Economics Graduate Program at the George Washington University. She joins us now from Washington, D.C. Welcome back to the program, Joann. Can I start with the House's passing of the $3.5 trillion budget blueprint? Because that now sets the stage for Democrats to enact Joe Biden's ambitious spending program, which includes an extension of social programs and huge spending on climate initiatives. Can you explain to us more about these proposals and what impact that they might have?
Well, excuse me. Thank you. It's great to be back. The proposals include lots of stuff that Democrats tend to like: expanded Medicare coverage for drugs, vision, hearing, universal preschool, expanded earned income tax credits and things like that. Lots of efforts on education and housing, climate change. It is a big spending bill, but don't forget the Democrats do have a majority, and so can actually get things done now that they won't be able to when if they're no longer in the majority.
Yes, and this is the big question, isn't it? Because this budget blueprint passed without a single Republican vote. And as you hinted, the Democrats at the moment hold a razor-thin majority both in the House and in the Senate. That could change, particularly in the House after the midterm elections. Do you believe that these ambitious spending plans could pass without support from the opposition?
Well, having been in Washington for quite a while now, I've seen the tone switch from having bipartisan legislation to pretty much partisan legislation. The Healthcare Act passed with only Democratic votes way back in 2010. And of course, the tax cut in 2017 during Trump's first year also was partisan. It had no Democratic support. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this path continue where when Democrats are in charge, the Democrats vote for things and the Republicans don't.
Can I ask you about the jobs market now? We are seeing signs of recovery, but we're also hearing from a lot of employers across the United States that they're actually having quite a tough time filling job vacancies, particularly in the hospitality, leisure and healthcare sectors. Some analysts, including Republicans, have blamed this on the Democrats' generous unemployment benefits. Is there any truth to that?
Well, there's the slogan is that when you pay people not to work, they're not going to work. And that has been that's true for a lot of different areas. Whether it's true and for the employment situation, it's hard to say. It's hard to blanketly blame the unemployment benefits. For example, the cost of housing is very high in some of these places where companies can't find workers. To work in San Francisco, but to get paid only a minimum wage, well, it's very hard to go do that. Of course, if you are getting unemployment benefits and you can afford not to have that 2-hour commute and that very low wage job, then you might stop working. But I think the difficulty in finding workers is more due to the high cost of living in combination with the low wages than to the unemployment benefits.
And can I turn your attention to the story that we just ran by Kyoko Gasha? That's Biden's executive order that's really looking to push sales of EV vehicles by 2030. Is this the right way to do it, in a sense, through force? Shouldn't car makers and people be, I guess, looking to adopt these measures voluntarily?
Well, we would like everything to be voluntary. And you may recall that back in about the 1980s, there were these voluntary export restraints with Japan to keep Japanese cars out of the US markets. They were voluntary, but I doubt they were anything but voluntary. The goal for the emission standards is a worthwhile one. It's clear that we do have climate change happening and we need to do something about it. The way to make the car companies reach these goals is, in fact, to have the prices encourage people to buy those kinds of cars. And what the administration is saying is that cars need to incorporate the cost of climate damage in them. And that's clearly a bigger issue for the fuel powered cars than for the electric. So if the cars actually incorporated the full cost, including the cost of the environment, you'd see the cost of electric vehicles go down and people would voluntarily switch to the electric over the gas powered cars.
Okay, Joann Weiner from the George Washington University. Really good to get your analysis. Thanks again for joining us.